Your daughter isn't scholarship material." The words cut through the crowded school auditorium so cleanly that even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to disappear. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rows of parents sat frozen beneath the bright fluorescent lights, their attention fixed on the front of the room, where Linda Parker stood beside a projector screen displaying the names of students selected for the district's prestigious STEM Excellence Scholarship. 12-year-old Ava Johnson felt every eye in the room drift toward her. Heat rushed into her cheeks. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the folded program resting in her lap. Beside her, Marcus Johnson sat perfectly still. His broad hands rested on his knees, rough from years of labor, but the muscles in his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Linda Parker offered a small smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm not saying Ava isn't a good student," she continued. "I'm simply saying that these programs require exceptional preparation, resources, and support systems. We have to be realistic." A few uncomfortable glances passed between parents. Others quickly looked away. Ava lowered her gaze to the floor. The polished gymnasium surface reflected the harsh white lights overhead. Her sneakers suddenly felt too old. Her thrift store cardigan suddenly felt too thin. Marcus inhaled slowly. He had learned long ago that anger solved very little. But hearing someone reduce his daughter's future to a polite excuse felt heavier than any toolbox he had carried across a construction site. The principal, Robert Harrison, stood quietly near the back wall. Most people didn't notice him. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't interrupting. He simply watched. The scholarship ceremony continued. Names were announced. Applause echoed through the auditorium. Smiles flashed for photographs. Yet Ava barely heard any of it. The words replayed inside her mind again and again. Not scholarship material. Not scholarship material. Not scholarship material. Earlier that morning, everything had felt different. Ava had stood in front of the bathroom mirror inside the small apartment she shared with her father. The morning. Sunlight slipped through worn blinds, painting soft golden stripes across the kitchen floor. Marcus had already returned from his overnight maintenance shift at the school district office building. His work boots sat beside the front door. His reflective safety vest hung over a chair. Despite having worked all night, he had made pancakes before the ceremony. The smell of butter and maple syrup still lingered in Ava's memory. "Today's your day," he had told her with a tired smile. "No matter what happens, remember that." Ava had smiled back. She believed him. She always did. For years, Marcus had worked every shift he could find. Nights, weekends, holidays. He repaired heating systems during winter storms. He fixed broken wiring during summer heat waves. He rarely complained. Every extra hour meant another opportunity for his daughter. Every paycheck carried a dream larger than himself. And Ava never wasted it. She studied late into the evening. She borrowed science books from the public library. She watched educational videos while other kids spent hours scrolling through social media. Her science fair projects often covered subjects far beyond her grade level. Teachers praised her curiosity. Neighbors praised her discipline. Yet now, sitting beneath the cold lights of the auditorium, none of that seemed to matter. Linda Parker continued discussing future opportunities for selected students. Her voice echoed through the microphone. Marcus glanced toward Ava. His daughter sat silently, staring at the floor. The disappointment in her eyes hurt more than any insult directed at him. Across the room, Principal Harrison slowly folded his arms. His gaze remained fixed on the Johnson family. Something about the name Johnson lingered in his memory, something he could not quite place. And as applause filled the auditorium once again, a quiet feeling settled deep inside him. This story was far from over. The parking lot outside Jefferson Middle School glowed beneath a pale afternoon sky. Families drifted toward their cars in small groups, their conversations blending into the distant sound of traffic from the nearby highway. Ava Johnson walked quietly beside her father. Her scholarship program folded neatly in her hands. She had stopped looking at it 20 minutes ago. The excitement she had carried into the building that morning had faded into something heavier. Marcus noticed the silence immediately. Usually, Ava filled every car ride with questions. Questions about science. Questions about history. Questions about why certain stars appeared brighter than others. Today, she simply stared out the passenger window as they pulled away from the school. The city rolled past them in muted colors. Small shops, gas stations, a grocery store parking lot packed with afternoon customers. Marcus kept both hands on the steering wheel. The old pickup truck rumbled steadily beneath them. He wanted to say something. He wanted to erase the hurt he had seen in his daughter's eyes. But some wounds required more than comforting words. Back at their apartment complex, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the cracked pavement. Children played basketball near the far end of the parking lot. A radio played somewhere from an open window. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Inside their apartment, Ava placed her backpack beside the kitchen table and disappeared into her room without turning on the television. Marcus watched her bedroom door close softly. That worried him more than tears would have. Ava loved learning. It was the center of who she was. Ever since she was little, she had been fascinated by how things worked. When she was 7, she had taken apart an old alarm clock just to understand the gears inside. When she was 9, she built a homemade weather station from recycled materials. Last year, she had won first place at the county science fair with a project about water filtration systems. She never asked for expensive toys. She asked for books. She asked for microscope kits. She asked questions nobody else her age seemed interested in asking. Marcus walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The light spilled across containers of leftovers and a carton of milk. He stared for a moment before closing the door again. He was tired. The kind of tired that settled into a person after years of working. Overnight shifts. Yet every sacrifice felt worth it when he looked at Ava. She was the reason he kept going. 3 hours later, the apartment had grown quiet. The golden sunlight outside faded into deep orange. Marcus sat at the small kitchen table reviewing utility bills when he heard movement in the hallway. Ava emerged carrying a thick binder. Her science project notes. Without a word, she spread papers across the table. Charts, research articles, handwritten calculations. Marcus looked up. Working already? He asked gently. Ava nodded. The regional science showcase deadline is next month. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. Marcus studied her for a moment. You know one person does not decide your future, right? Ava lowered her eyes toward the papers. She seemed pretty sure. The room fell silent. The refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere outside, a siren echoed through the evening air. Marcus leaned forward. When I was your age, people were sure about a lot of things, he said quietly. Most of them were wrong. Ava finally looked at him. For the first time since leaving the school, a faint spark returned to her eyes. Not confidence. Not yet. But curiosity. The same curiosity that had carried her through every challenge she had ever faced. Marcus smiled. Show me what you are working on. Ava opened her binder and pointed to a diagram. As she began explaining her project, her voice gradually grew stronger. Neither of them noticed that several miles away, Principal Robert Harrison sat alone in his office long after the school had emptied. A stack of scholarship evaluations rested on his desk. The Johnson name remained fixed in his thoughts. Something about the situation felt wrong. And as the evening shadows stretched across the walls of his office, he reached for Ava Johnson's file. The next morning arrived with a steady gray sky hanging over Jefferson Middle School. A light drizzle coated the sidewalks, turning the parking lot asphalt dark and reflective. Students hurried through the front entrance carrying backpacks and steaming cups of hot chocolate, while teachers moved between classrooms preparing for the day. Inside the administrative wing, Principal Robert Harrison sat behind his desk long before the first bell rang. Ava Johnson's file remained open in front of him. Beside it sat a stack of scholarship evaluations, recommendation forms, scoring sheets, and academic records. The soft glow of his desk lamp illuminated every page. Robert adjusted his reading glasses and reviewed the documents for a third time. The numbers did not match the conclusions. That bothered him. Ava's standardized test scores ranked among the highest in her grade. Her science fair records showed consistent achievement. Her teacher evaluations from previous years described her as exceptionally curious, disciplined, and academically advanced. Yet somehow, her scholarship ranking had fallen significantly lower than expected during the final review process. Robert leaned back in his chair. Through the office window, he watched students crossing the courtyard beneath umbrellas. Something about the situation felt incomplete. He had spent 20 years in education, long enough to recognize when facts and outcomes did not align. Across campus, Ava sat quietly in science class. She took notes while her classmates discussed an upcoming lab project. The room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and freshly printed worksheets. Normally, science was her favorite part of the day. Today, her concentration drifted. Linda Parker stood near the front whiteboard reviewing scholarship opportunities available through the district. Her voice carried confidently across the room. Several students listened attentively. Others doodled in notebooks. Ava focused on her assignment and avoided looking up. Linda occasionally glanced toward her. The expression was subtle, not openly hostile, not openly supportive either, simply dismissive, the kind of look that suggested a decision had already been made. During lunch period, Robert Harrison walked through the faculty wing carrying a folder beneath one arm. Teachers greeted him as he passed. Most received a polite smile in return. Eventually, he arrived outside Linda Parker's classroom. The door stood partially open. Inside, Linda organized paperwork while entering grades into her computer. Robert knocked lightly against the doorframe. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Linda looked up immediately. "Of course." Robert stepped inside. The classroom smelled faintly of coffee and laminated paper. Student projects decorated the walls. Achievement certificates framed one corner of the room. Everything appeared orderly, professional, successful. Robert placed the folder on a nearby desk. "I was reviewing scholarship evaluations last night," he said calmly. Linda's smile remained unchanged. "Wonderful program this year." Robert nodded slowly. "Tell me about Ava Johnson." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Linda's face. Then it disappeared. "Bright student," she answered. "Hardworking. But not scholarship material?" Robert asked. Linda folded her hands together. "Potential is important, but these opportunities require more than intelligence. Students need the right environment to thrive." Robert studied her carefully. "And what exactly does that mean?" Linda looked toward the classroom window. "Some children face challenges outside of school that make long-term success less likely. We have to consider the complete picture." Silence settled over the room. The distant sound of lockers closing echoed through the hallway. Robert glanced back toward the folder. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface. Yet the numbers sitting inside that folder told a different story. Much different. "I see," he said quietly. Linda smiled again. "I simply want what is best for the program." Robert nodded once and picked up the folder. As he turned toward the door, his eyes landed on a recommendation sheet partially visible beneath a stack of papers on Linda's desk. Just one quick glance. But it was enough. The score written there did not match the score recorded in Ava Johnson's official scholarship file. Robert stopped walking. A cold feeling settled in his chest. And for the first time, he began to suspect that the problem was far bigger than a single comment made during a ceremony. The discovery stayed with Robert Harrison for the rest of the day. Long after students filled the hallways between classes and teachers gathered for department meetings, his thoughts remained fixed on the two numbers he had seen. One score appeared on the recommendation sheet inside Linda Parker's classroom. Another appeared in Ava Johnson's official scholarship file. They should have been identical. They were not. By late afternoon, sunlight filtered through the administrative office windows in long golden bands. Robert closed his office door and spread scholarship documents across his desk. Page after page covered the polished wood surface. Evaluation forms, teacher recommendations, academic rankings, interview summaries. He moved carefully through each document. Methodical, patient, the way he approached every serious decision. The school had earned its reputation because standards mattered. Facts mattered. Fairness mattered. As he compared records, a troubling pattern slowly emerged. Ava's academic scores consistently ranked near the top of the applicant pool. Her science achievements exceeded those of many students who had received scholarship offers. Even her extracurricular evaluations were strong. Yet several final review categories showed unusually low ratings. Categories that relied heavily on subjective judgment rather than measurable performance. Robert leaned back in his chair. The office felt unusually quiet. The distant sounds of custodians cleaning classrooms echoed faintly through the building. Outside, evening clouds drifted across the sky. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. 20 years in education had taught him that mistakes happened, but this did not feel like a mistake. Meanwhile, several miles away, Ava sat at the kitchen table surrounded by science journals and handwritten notes. A small desk lamp cast warm light across the pages. Marcus stood at the stove preparing dinner after waking from a short afternoon nap before his overnight shift. The smell of tomato soup filled the apartment. Ava stared at a graph displayed on her laptop screen. Normally, she would have been excited to explain her research findings. Tonight, she seemed quieter, not defeated, just cautious. Marcus carried 2 bowls to the table and sat across from her. "How is the project coming?" he asked. Ava glanced at the screen. "I think I found a better way to improve filtration efficiency." Marcus smiled. "Sounds impressive." Ava hesitated before speaking again. "Do you think people can decide who you are before they really know you?" The question hung in the air. Marcus lowered his spoon slowly. He understood exactly where it came from. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "But that says more about them than it does about you." Ava looked down at her notebook. The lamp reflected softly in her eyes. "It still hurts." Marcus nodded. "I know." Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside the apartment window, headlights moved through the parking lot below. Life carried on, yet the disappointment still lingered between them. Back at Jefferson Middle School, Robert opened one final folder. This one contained archived scholarship records from previous years. At first, he searched simply for comparison. Then he noticed something unexpected. Several students whose applications had passed through the same evaluation process showed a similar pattern. Strong objective scores, lower subjective ratings, recommendations that seemed inconsistent with overall performance. Robert's expression hardened. He reached for a legal pad and began writing names, dates, scores, notes. The list grew longer than he expected. By the time darkness settled outside his office windows, he had filled nearly 2 pages. A quiet knock interrupted his concentration. His administrative assistant stepped into the doorway. "You are still here?" she asked. Robert glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7:30 in the evening. "Just finishing something." She smiled politely and left. Robert looked back at the files covering his desk. Finishing was the wrong word. This investigation was only beginning. And as he stared once more at Ava Johnson's application, he realized the next step would force difficult conversations that some people inside the school would not welcome at all. By Thursday afternoon, tension had settled over Jefferson Middle School like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. Word traveled quickly in schools, even when nobody officially said anything. Teachers noticed closed-door meetings. Office staff noticed unusual requests for records. Students noticed adults whispering in hallways. Ava noticed something too. Linda Parker had become colder. Not openly unkind. Not openly confrontational. Just distant. Every answer Ava gave in class received a brief nod and little else. Every raised hand seemed overlooked. Every accomplishment felt invisible. During the final period of the day, students gathered in the library for a scholarship preparation workshop. The room smelled of books, printer ink, and freshly cleaned carpet. Posters celebrating academic achievement covered the walls. Ava sat quietly near the middle row, notebook open, pencil ready. Linda stood at the front of the room leading the session. Several scholarship recipients from different grades attended. As the discussion continued, students were invited to share future goals. One by one, they spoke about engineering, medicine, technology, and research. When Ava's turn arrived, she hesitated before standing. The room grew quiet. "I want to study environmental engineering," she said. "I want to develop affordable water purification systems for communities that need them." A few students nodded respectfully. It was a thoughtful answer. Ava began explaining her research project when Linda interrupted with a polite smile. "Those are wonderful ambitions," she said. "But it is important for young people to keep practical expectations." The words landed softly, yet the effect was immediate. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ava felt her stomach tighten. Linda continued speaking. "Dreams are important, but success requires circumstances that not everyone has access to. Sometimes the most responsible thing we can do is focus on goals that match our situation." Silence spread across the room. Nobody laughed. Nobody commented. Somehow that made it worse. Ava stood frozen beside her chair. The fluorescent lights above seemed brighter than before. Her notebook suddenly felt heavier in her hands. Across the library, a school counselor looked down at her notes. Another teacher glanced toward the window. No one challenged the statement. Ava slowly sat back down. Her face remained calm, but inside, disappointment pressed against her chest. For a moment, she wondered whether everyone in the room secretly agreed. That evening, rain tapped softly against the windows of the Johnson apartment. Marcus had just returned home from work when Ava told him about the workshop. She sat at the kitchen table, turning a pencil between her fingers. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across her science notes. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he remained quiet for several seconds. "Do you know what I hear when you describe your project?" he finally asked. Ava shook her head. "I hear someone solving problems." He leaned forward. "The world has enough people who tell others what they cannot do. It needs more people willing to ask what is possible." Ava looked down at the table. Her eyes shimmered beneath the light, but she refused to let tears come. Marcus reached across the table and gently tapped her research binder. "This speaks louder than anyone's opinion." Across town, Principal Robert Harrison sat alone in the district conference room reviewing additional records that had arrived that afternoon. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Documents that should have matched did not. Evaluations had been altered. Rankings had shifted. Patterns repeated themselves across multiple years. Robert closed the last folder and exhaled slowly. The evidence was no longer raising questions. It was providing answers. And those answers would soon force the entire school to confront a truth that could no longer remain hidden. Rain fell steadily through most of Friday evening, turning the city streets into ribbons of reflected light. Water traced slow paths down apartment windows. Traffic moved carefully beneath glowing street lamps. Inside the Johnson apartment, the world felt smaller, quieter, almost suspended between uncertainty and hope. Marcus sat near the living room window with a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. He should have been sleeping before another overnight shift, but his thoughts refused to settle. Across the room, Ava sat on the floor beside the coffee table, surrounded by pages of research. Colored graphs, engineering sketches, and handwritten notes formed a careful circle around her. The soft hum of the apartment refrigerator mixed with the gentle tapping of rain against the glass. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people carrying the same burden in different ways. Ava erased a line from one of her diagrams and drew it again. Then again. Finally, she placed the pencil down and stared at the page. "Dad." Marcus looked up. "Yeah." She hesitated. What if they never changed their minds? The question lingered between them. Outside, headlights passed through the parking lot below, briefly illuminating the ceiling before disappearing again. Marcus studied his daughter for a moment. The uncertainty in her voice hurt more than any unfair comment he had heard at the school. "Then we keep moving forward anyway," he answered softly. Ava lowered her eyes. "Even if it feels unfair?" Marcus nodded. "Especially then." The room returned to silence. Ava looked back at her project. A filtration system designed to remove contaminants from drinking water using affordable materials. Something she had spent months developing. Something she believed could help people. She ran her fingers across the edge of the notebook. "I still want to finish it," she said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Good." She glanced up. "Even if nobody notices?" Marcus leaned forward. The warm glow of the lamp reflected in his eyes. "The right people always notice eventually." Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and returned to her work. Across town, Principal Robert Harrison stood alone in his office. The school building had been empty for hours. Most classroom lights were dark. Hallways sat silent beneath emergency lighting. Rain tapped gently against his office windows. The stack of scholarship files remained spread across his desk. Every document had been reviewed. Every discrepancy documented. Every question answered. Robert picked up Ava Johnson's file once more. This time, he was not looking for mistakes. He was looking at the student herself. Science awards. Teacher comments from previous years. Community service records. Academic achievements. The more he read, the more one thought returned again and again. This young girl had earned every opportunity placed in front of her. He turned another page. Then another. Suddenly his attention stopped on a section listing parent information. Marcus Johnson. The name stared back at him beneath the lamplight. Robert froze. A memory surfaced from deep within the past. Not recent. Not even close. More than a decade old. A rainy night. Flashing emergency lights. The smell of smoke. A stranger helping without hesitation. Robert slowly lowered the file. His heartbeat quickened. For years, the memory had faded into fragments. Faces blurred by time. Details lost beneath countless responsibilities. But now something was returning. Something important. He stared out at the rain falling beyond the glass. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Johnson was likely preparing for another night of work, completely unaware that an old chapter of his life had just reopened. Robert remained motionless for several seconds. Then he reached for his phone. There was one record he suddenly needed to find. And the answer waiting inside that forgotten memory might change everything. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. The weekend rain had disappeared, leaving the sky an uninterrupted stretch of blue above Jefferson Middle School. Students filled the campus with the usual energy of a new week. Locker doors opened and closed. Conversations echoed through hallways. Teachers carried coffee cups and lesson plans as classes prepared to begin. Yet beneath the normal routine, something important was about to happen. Shortly after first period, Principal Robert Harrison requested an administrative review meeting. Several faculty members gathered in the conference room adjacent to the main office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the school courtyard. Linda Parker entered carrying a folder and took her usual seat. She appeared confident, calm, certain of her position. Robert sat at the head of the table. A stack of documents rested neatly in front of him. His expression revealed very little. The meeting began with routine discussion, attendance reports, program funding, academic initiatives. Then Robert opened a different folder. The room grew noticeably quieter. "Before we continue," he said evenly, "there is another matter we need to address." Several administrators exchanged curious glances. Linda shifted slightly in her chair. Robert placed several scholarship evaluation sheets on the table. "Over the past week, I conducted a review of this year's scholarship selection process." Silence settled across the room. Robert continued. "The review identified inconsistencies between original evaluation documents and final recorded scores." A few eyebrows lifted. Linda's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Robert carefully presented the records. Original scoring sheets, recommendation forms, final rankings. Side by side, the discrepancies became impossible to ignore. Objective academic performance remained strong. Yet certain subjective evaluations had been significantly reduced without documented justification. The evidence spoke clearly. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged the documents. Several administrators leaned forward to examine the pages more closely. One counselor quietly shook her head. Linda finally spoke. "There may be reasonable explanations." Robert met her gaze calmly. "I considered that possibility." He opened another folder. "That is why I reviewed records from previous years as well." Additional documents appeared on the conference table. Similar patterns emerged. Similar inconsistencies. Similar outcomes. The room remained silent. The weight of the evidence grew heavier with every page. Linda's confidence began to fade. Across campus, Ava sat in science class unaware of what was unfolding. She focused on her assignment while sunlight illuminated her notebook. For the first time in days, she felt herself concentrating fully again. Her filtration project was nearly complete. The work itself brought comfort. It reminded her why she loved science in the first place. Back inside the conference room, Robert closed the final folder. "Every student deserves to be evaluated fairly," he said. "No exceptions." The words settled heavily across the table. Then he revealed the final finding. Ava Johnson's scholarship application, when scored according to the original documented evaluations, ranked among the highest in the entire district. Several administrators exchanged stunned looks. One openly gasped. Linda lowered her eyes toward the table. For a moment, nobody spoke. The truth had finally entered the room. Robert stood and walked toward the window. Beyond the glass, students crossed the courtyard beneath the morning sun. Then another memory returned with complete clarity. 15 years earlier. A rainy highway. A terrible accident. Confusion. Fear. And one man who had stopped to help when many others had driven past. Marcus Johnson. Robert slowly turned back toward the room. After days of investigation, one truth had become undeniable. Ava had inherited more than intelligence from her father. She had inherited character. And before this story reached its end, the entire school was about to learn exactly what that meant. The announcement came 2 days later. Students, parents, and faculty gathered once again inside the same auditorium where disappointment had first settled over the Johnson family. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating rows of folding chairs and polished floors. The atmosphere felt different this time. Quieter, more uncertain. Rumors had spread throughout the school. People knew something important was about to happen, even if they did not know exactly what. Ava sat beside Marcus near the middle of the room. She wore the same navy cardigan she had worn to the original scholarship ceremony. Her research binder rested neatly on her lap. Marcus sat with his hands folded together, calm as always. Yet deep inside, he felt the weight of every long shift, every sacrifice, and every moment he had spent encouraging his daughter to keep believing in herself. On the stage, Principal Robert Harrison stepped toward the podium. Conversations faded immediately. The microphone carried his voice clearly throughout the room. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today we are addressing the results of a recent review concerning our scholarship selection process." A ripple of attention moved through the audience. Robert spoke. Carefully, professionally, he explained that inconsistencies had been discovered within portions of the evaluation system. He explained that records had been reviewed and verified. Most importantly, he explained that corrections had been made. The auditorium remained silent. Then Robert looked directly toward Ava. One student in particular deserves recognition. Ava felt her heart begin to race. Marcus slowly turned toward her. Robert lifted a folder from the podium. After a complete review of all documented evaluations, academic records, and scholarship criteria, Ava Johnson has officially been ranked among the top candidates in the entire district. For a brief second, the room seemed frozen. Then applause erupted. Not polite applause, genuine applause. Teachers stood. Parents smiled. Students turned toward Ava. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium. Ava sat completely still. She could barely process what she was hearing. Robert continued. Effective immediately, Ava Johnson will receive full scholarship recognition and represent Jefferson Middle School in the district STEM Excellence Program. More applause followed. Ava looked toward her father. Marcus smiled softly. Pride shined in his eyes, but there was something else too. Relief. The kind of relief that comes after carrying a burden for a very long time. Then Robert paused. His expression softened. There is one more thing that needs to be said. The room gradually quieted again. Robert stepped away from the podium and looked directly toward Marcus. 15 years ago, during one of the worst nights of my life, a stranger stopped to help me when he had every reason to keep driving. Marcus frowned slightly. He did not understand where this was going. Robert smiled. That stranger was Marcus Johnson. Murmurs spread throughout the audience. Ava turned toward her father with surprise. Robert continued. He never asked for recognition. He never asked for anything in return. He simply helped because it was the right thing to do. The room grew completely silent. Character recognizes character, Robert said quietly. And when I reviewed Ava's record, I realized that same character lives in his daughter. Marcus lowered his eyes for a moment. The attention made him uncomfortable. It always had. Yet the warmth in the room felt impossible to ignore. Robert looked toward Ava once more. Your achievements earned this opportunity. Your hard work earned it. Nobody gave it to you. You earned it. Ava felt tears gather in her eyes. But this time, they came from something entirely different. For the first time since this journey began, she no longer felt invisible. She felt seen. 3 weeks later, spring sunlight washed across the campus of the district STEM showcase. The event filled a convention center nearly the size of a football field, with rows of student exhibits stretching beneath bright ceiling lights. Posters, prototypes, research displays, and engineering models covered every corner of the room. Families moved between exhibits carrying programs and cameras. Judges stopped to ask questions. Excitement floated through the air like electricity. Ava Johnson stood beside her project display, wearing her school badge and a carefully pressed blue blazer. Her water filtration system sat neatly arranged on the table before her. Months of work had led to this moment. The nervousness she once carried had been replaced by quiet confidence. She no longer worried about proving herself to people who had already made up their minds. She simply focused on the work she loved. Across the room, Marcus watched from a distance. He stood near the back wall, hands resting comfortably in his pockets. The long overnight shifts continued. The bills still arrived every month. Life was not magically perfect, yet something had changed. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that the future might be a little brighter than the past. Judges gathered around Ava's exhibit throughout the day. She answered every question clearly. She explained the science behind her design. She described how affordable materials could improve access to cleaner drinking water in underserved communities. Her voice remained steady. Her eyes remained focused. People listened, not because someone told them to, because she had earned their attention. By late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows overlooking the city skyline. The awards ceremony began. Students filled rows of chairs while families gathered behind them. Ava sat quietly, hands folded together. Marcus remained several rows back. Principal Robert Harrison had attended as well. He sat near the aisle, smiling as names were announced. When the award for innovative engineering research was finally presented, Ava heard her name echo across the room. For a second, she simply blinked. Then applause surrounded her from every direction. She rose slowly and walked toward the stage. The lights seemed brighter than she remembered. The applause felt warmer. As she accepted the award, her eyes instinctively searched the crowd. They found Marcus immediately. He was standing now, not cheering loudly, not drawing attention to himself, just smiling. The same quiet smile he had worn throughout her entire life whenever she succeeded. Later that evening, after the crowds had disappeared and the convention center began to empty, father and daughter stepped outside together. The air felt cool and fresh. The city glowed beneath the fading colors of sunset. Cars moved quietly along distant streets. For several moments, neither spoke. Ava held the award carefully against her chest. Marcus looked toward the horizon. Finally, Ava broke the silence. "You never told me about helping Principal Harrison." Marcus shrugged gently. "It was a long time ago. Why did you never tell anyone?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Because doing the right thing is not supposed to be a transaction." Ava thought about that as they stood together beneath the evening sky. The city lights flickered like distant stars. A soft breeze moved through the trees lining the sidewalk. For years, Marcus had taught her lessons without realizing it. Not through speeches, not through lectures, through example. As they began walking toward the parking lot, the last rays of sunlight reflected across the glass buildings around them. Their shadows stretched long across the pavement. No grand speeches remained. No arguments remained. Only a father, a daughter, and the quiet certainty that character had carried them exactly where they were meant to be.